Greetings, everyone. My name is Mirna, and on behalf of the Mindalia TV team, we want to welcome you to Mindalia live streaming, where thousands of people around the world gather to see the lectures and interviews organized by Mindalia TV. Today with us, we have Scott Tusa. Scott is a Buddhist teacher based in New York with a very interesting story. He has been in a monastery for more than 8 years, and nowadays he works teaching, among other things, meditation, Buddhism. And we're going to be talking about him today about, among other things, no mud, no lotus. Scott, we want to welcome you to Mindalia live streaming, and I'm going to go with you right now.
Hey, thank you very much. It's really wonderful to be here.
Thank you, Scott. And let's start by asking you, what is it that you do? You are a Buddhist teacher. You have been a monk for a while. Are you still a monk? Is that something that you still have that is like an active condition, or once you leave the monastery, you're not longer that? How does it work? Tell us a little bit about it.
Sure. So I was a monk for 9 years. I started when I was 28, and I stopped being a monk about a year and a half ago. So I'm still a Buddhist and still, teach Buddhism, but no longer practicing as a Buddhist monastic. I've taught Buddhism for the last 10 years, Buddhist philosophy, and also some mindfulness meditation and some forms of secular meditation. And now that's what I do full time. So I live in Brooklyn, New York, and I teach here around New York City, as well as travel around mostly the United States, but at the moment, but maybe international starting in the fall with a retreat we might do in Santa Marta, Colombia. And other than that, yeah, mostly just around the United States, leading retreats, workshops, things like that.
That sounds awesome. Tell me something. What brought you to that path? Have you always had that mindset, that thought, or was it special circumstances that made you go towards that?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think it started for me pretty young. I grew up kind of like sort of Jewish. We call it Reformed Jewish. And so some religion, but it was a little bit more social for me and not so spiritual necessarily. I think, of course, as a kid, you don't always connect with the religion of your birth. And when I became a teenager, I became pretty like agnostic and atheist, really not interested in religion, a little bit anti-authority and all that stuff. I was into punk rock communities in San Francisco, California. And that sort of influenced me. And then when I was almost about 16 years old, my mom died from cancer. She had suffered for a long time with the illness. And something really shifted in me at that point. And I don't know how to put it, because it wasn't like a thought process so much. It was just a feeling that I wanted to see if there was more meaning to life than just sort of hang out with my friends, kind of a little bit more of a darker view on the world that I had at that age, just smoking a lot of pot and hanging out and drinking and things like that. And of course, doing, I was a musician my whole life, so having fun and doing good stuff with that. And so I started to explore different spiritual paths. I started reading books, and eventually, I'm a drummer, so I've been a drummer since I was probably 10 years old. My dad's a jazz musician, so I grew up studying and playing jazz, and also learning a little bit about sort of world music through a jazz lens. Mm-hmm. And so around maybe 16 or 17, I started getting more interested in Latin music, like Brazilian music, some Afro-Cuban percussion, and I started learning kind of those styles of percussion and hand drumming, and then I actually became interested in like capoeira, this practice in Brazil. And then I started to learn more about some of the African religions that kind of ended up blending with Catholicism in Cuba and Brazil and other places. And so, yeah, I met some practitioners and started kind of practicing Santeria.
Okay.
A little bit. And that was kind of the entrance for my exploration of spirituality.
Okay.
And to me, it was a way also to connect with my mother, because there's practices for connecting with ancestors. And so it was a way of connecting with that, honoring that. And then eventually I went away to college, to music school in Boston, Berklee College of Music, to study, and mostly percussion, but then I moved back into jazz. And at that point, I got really interested in meditation. And I started reading, like, for instance, some of your listeners may know Autobiography of a Yogi by Yogananda, which
Okay.
was super influential on me. I couldn't believe there was people who existed like that, who were like yogis and yoginis who achieved such, like, strong, amazing states of meditation. And it really inspired me. I didn't have a word for it, but I knew this is my home. And so I got really interested in that, and then eventually started reading about Buddhism, and more specifically Tibetan Buddhism. And Tibetan Buddhism, just the clarity and the passion and the whole culture behind it kind of floored me. And I just felt it wasn't as intellectual for me as like just a feeling of just a lot of inspiration and awe and joy. And then that's around the same time I met my first Tibetan teacher. I was about 19 or 20, and started studying Buddhism then. But I was still going to college at that point.
You are so lucky that you were able to get in contact with such an interesting path at such a young age.
Yeah.
After that point, you started like going on that, and then it took you 8 years to become a monk, which is, I would say, that is still a few, because most people follow, a trend. Not, let's not say it a trend, but a doctrine, to say it in a way, and we don't always go that far. So, you know, to the point that you went. And I understand Buddhism is not a religion, right?
Well, it has. It often people say that. I think it is, but it has aspects of religion that have been codified around it. I don't think the Buddha necessarily intended to start a religion. He just recognized um, in his own experience, through watching his mind, he came to a type of freedom we call nirvana, or enlightenment. And then he kind of just taught the ways to get there, basically. And of course, then religious aspects formed around it. But maybe you could say that in a sense, because it's really the religious framework is for working with your mind, for working with your emotions and your inner life. But I don't know. I would say, like, in a sense, all religions, at their most inner contemplative level, are doing that too, right? So yeah, to a certain degree.
Okay, and tell me something. How has it impact your life? Like, how is your lifestyle? Tell us a little bit about it. Like, do
Yeah.
you follow like dietary, let's not say restrictions, but patterns, or spiritual patterns? What do you think about like mind, body, soul? How is your lifestyle when it comes to that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a big question, because it's been, almost 20 years. Like you said, when I was 19, 20, I wanted to become a monk then, and I chose to wait 8 years. But over that whole time, I was studying and practicing and going to meditation retreats and developing my practice, and also kind of connecting into what it might be like to be a monk, trying to save some money, things like that. And then I became a monk at 28. But, right away, around the age of 20, I started a daily practice, just every day, every morning, waking up, maybe taking a shower, eating something, and then basically diving into a meditation practice, or a practice of some prayer and meditation. And that just became a habit for me. That has been something that I do every day. And that as a form for then, like, how do I integrate Buddhist philosophy? How do I use meditation to understand my mind? How do I use it to uncover what we call, like, our nature? Uncovering the qualities that, from a Buddhist perspective, compassion, loving kindness, awareness, wakefulness, are parts of our mind that are latent, but when we start to work on them, they can come out further and further. And so I think it's more of a process of following a set of principles, of course, Buddhism has ethics as well, like, of course, like normal things like avoiding killing people and stealing and things like that, but also some more specific ones, not just ones that are more obvious, but more specific ones for, watching the mind and using the process of mindfulness to be aware of, are we thinking in constructive ways towards others? Are we wishing others well, or are we wishing them harm? Are we jealous of others? And recognizing how those kinds of emotions and states of mind not only make us not that nice of a person to be around, but they also harm our own minds, because we become more unhappy, we become more unsettled and full of aggression. And so Buddhist ethics also aren't just watching how we behave outwardly, but really watching the mind. And so monks' vows are like that too. So monks' vows, you take that further, where you put the boundaries of, you're not going to have a family or a partner. You take a celibate life. And a lot of people sometimes can view those kinds of things as restrictions, but in the Buddhist path, they're boundaries for then investigating our inner experience, investigating, how do I relate to what I'm trying to work with right now. So when you take out, for instance, as a monk, you take out romantic relationships, it doesn't mean your sexuality dies or your need for intimacy or relationship dies. It means you just get to work with it in a different way. And you learn to see with a different lens, what are we looking towards for happiness? What are we actually looking towards to be reliable as something to provide depth, warmth, and ultimately happiness for ourselves and others. So I think everything is an exploration of that. And so, there's forms of daily practice, all kinds of different meditations we engage on the Buddhist path, different philosophies and ways of thinking. But all of it is really, I feel like I call it a deep chewing, like chewing.
Okay.
Because it's an investigation into
Into
how,
who you are.
and how how am I relating to my environment? What is real? What is true? What is not true? All of that kind of thing, right?
Okay. And how do you, in Buddhism, how do you relate to divinity? For
Yeah,
you guys, is there a creator, a source, a god? How is it? Can you explain that to our audience?
sure. Yeah, you're starting with the easy questions, I think. Joking. So in Buddhism, it's one of the few non-theistic traditions in the world. I believe there's just Buddhism and Jainism. I'm not sure if Taoism is theistic or not.
Jainism is beautiful too.
Yeah, it's a beautiful religion. And so because of that, there's, I could speak from a Buddhist perspective. Basically, there is divinity in the sense of like, there's a higher power in the form of enlightened beings who have walked this path of being an inner being, looking and uncovered what the nature of reality is, or the nature of the mind is. And they've uncovered that through deep investigation and practice. And that kind of being is not just free then, and then eventually we consider they've freed themselves from suffering. They've freed themselves from all kinds of suffering, dissatisfaction, and having to continually cycle in that dissatisfaction, be it moment to moment or life to life. And so those kind of beings then just don't disappear. They're still around, supposedly, but they're around as compassionate beings in order to help others to free themselves. So we have this view that's kind of a higher power, but it's not a creator principle. So anyone can become a Buddha from a Buddhist perspective. It's not restrictive to men or restrictive to women or restrictive to anyone else. Anyone can do it. And it's just a matter of putting in the effort and having the tools and putting the energy towards that, right? And really integrating what we call learning, reflection, and meditation. So there's kind of a higher power in the sense like we may ask for help to these enlightened beings. We're going to engage with human teachers who represent sometimes those enlightened beings towards us, meaning we look to them as those who are helping us along the path. But then it's not like it's not our creator, right? So it's a little bit different, a little bit of a different relationship. And so Buddhism generally is non-theistic because Buddhism doesn't believe there's a point in time where there was an actual creation. So Buddhists believe in beginningless time, which is which again opens up a lot of other, cans of worms, so called, right?
Yes, it is managed in spirituality that time is like a constructed thing for human mind. So
Yes,
because we are not capable actually of digesting the whole eternity, so we like file time in hours and years and millennia. How is Buddhism in the same page when it comes
yeah,
to that?
exactly. So from a Buddhist perspective, time is relative. Yeah. And therefore you can't, that's one of the reasons you can't find a beginning, right? Because it's a relative perspective. And also then looking back, supposedly the Buddha couldn't see because, once a being becomes enlightened from a Buddhist perspective, they have a type of omniscience. And so the Buddha could see back with that omniscience, but he couldn't see a beginning when there was an actual beginning to sentient beings, basically. And of course, this is based on the Buddhist principle of rebirth, meaning that our consciousness has been taking rebirth again and again and again and again and again and again since the beginning of this time. But that's not like in Buddhism, it's not like a happy thing. It's actually like a reason to understand why we want to get out of that cycle, right?
You say that is not a happy thing. Do you see after all this time, and we talked earlier about suffering, what is suffering to you?
Yeah.
From your perspective and from the Buddhism perspective?
Oh, from my perspective, I think it's those moments for me when I'm really resisting what's happening. When I'm caught up and identifying so strongly with a painful situation in my life, be it a painful emotion, a painful physical sensation, or just not getting my way, or something I wanted changed, right? From a Buddhist perspective, we divide it into three types. And so this is like, one type is just the obvious ones, like getting sick, aging, eventually having to die, those kinds of things that are just facts of life. Also included in there is like, when we have a lot of emotional challenges and it's really painful for us. The second type is a little more subtle, which is basically saying that within a moment of perceived pleasure, there is change. And within that, because something is changing all the time, it doesn't usually change to feel better. It usually changes the opposite way, right? Then the third type is even more subtle, which is saying basically the due to identifying at all with an experience in a fixed, rigid, or reified way, we create the cause of suffering. So these are quite deep Buddhist principles, especially the third one's quite complicated and a little bit deep. But essentially, it's the bad news, but it's setting out the bad news like a doctor saying, okay, here's your issue. But then the doctor says, and here's what we're going to do, right? Here's the remedies we're going to bring. Here's what how we're going to attack your illness, right? And so the Buddha, similarly, he talked about these three types of suffering, and then, or dissatisfaction, sometimes we say. In Pali, they call it dukkha. And then basically went on to say, but this is caused. There's a reason this is happening to you. And therefore, we can eliminate that cause, right? And so that's what the whole path is saying, is if we essentially learn to be an inner being and learn to be a master of our own minds and emotions, we can become free. Free not in a sense where then we go to some other heaven. Free in the sense we have no hangups, So it's quite a beautiful path, It's quite a.
Basically, it's not a matter of the context or it's a matter of perspective. Regardless of whatever is going on around you, you have the recipe to make it a better life, right?
Yeah, that's kind of what we're intending to do as a Buddhist, and that perfect. And I like the way you said that. And then from there we start, when we get a little bit of freedom, right? We start to see how much suffering others are going through around us, and there's nothing there's nothing we can do, but our heart breaks open in compassion, for just the suffering around us in the world that we want to help, right? So you know, a lot of people think meditation and Buddhism can be selfish, but no, it's actually as we get more free, we have more capability to actually help others, because we can see a lot of us have a wish to help others, to really change uh, really painful situations that are going on, to help others who are going through that. But eventually, most of us burn out, uh, and so, meaning we can work towards that, but at some point, I think some people don't, but I think some of us burn out. And so the idea here is, as we become more skillful and more free, we know how to work with our emotions. We know not to take them so seriously, not to take every thought we have so seriously. And there's more freedom then to exchange ourselves for others, and to not only want to help, but we see that as kind of the basis for our own well-being as well. And we start to see our inner connection more, and that uh, how can I say that my happiness is more important than yours? I feel that because I'm, still working through my stuff. But the truth is, logically, there's no reason, right, that it is any more important. And so we start to really feel that, embody that. That's when our life really starts to shift, I feel.
Do you guys believe in the idea of the fact that we are all one thing, one being, with Earth and with every living thing in the planet?
Yeah, so there's a little bit of a distinction, which is we would say everything's interconnected or interdependent. We wouldn't say it's one, right? Because, for instance, if you eat like a strawberry right now, I don't taste the strawberry, right? But we're interconnected in the sense that, we probably have somewhere some connection to that strawberry, out of all of our spider webs and connections of our life that go out, right? So we would say we're all interconnected and we affect each other, but we're not necessarily the same, meaning like one, right? So just a little distinction.
Okay. And do you imagine your life without Buddhism? Where would you be without it?
I think I would be uh, in a really like touring in a band around the world.
That's not bad.
I don't know. It depends what band it is. I was gonna say I was gonna use maybe not a great band. I don't know.
Well,
I
it's
think
a matter of perspective, no?
yeah, it's a matter of perspective. I think I would probably be a musician and doing that. I mean, I still could do music, but for me, it's all the study I've done in Buddhism and the work I've done on my own path, as well as the blessing and benefit I've received from my teachers. I feel like I want to share with others, and help them.
When you just said that some of you burn out, what do you mean with that?
Hi. So this is kind of
Am I getting too rough?
no. It's like I don't want to assume anyone's experience, right? So
Okay.
I can't really say like so everybody has to check their own experience, their own
Makes
mind.
sense.
But I think generally at a certain point, some of us are a little bit more self-absorbed than others. So obviously, the less self-absorbed we are, the less we're going to get burnout, right? But often what happens is if we don't have the skill to handle when we get emotionally overwhelmed, or when we hit kind of our limit for what we can handle within a given situation, or when there's a challenge coming at us and we have no way to find resilience in that, we're just going to hit a wall, and that's what I mean by burning out, is when we hit that wall. Like, for instance, I think a lot of us are struggling with, we're on information overload these days. There's so much media pouring in to our day, and we see things that nobody would have ever seen 100 years ago, 200 years ago, meaning you can just see right the moment a war starts, at the other side of the world. And I think some of us, it becomes this way of like, we take the weight of that onto our shoulders, and not in a way of transforming and helping the problem, but in a way where it becomes
Weights you down.
like a heaviness and an overwhelm again of like, wow, look at the world we're in, it's so bad. But the truth is, there's so many good things in the world that just doesn't get reported on. And also it's how we view and how we look at it. That's not to say there isn't bad things and destructive, violent things that we should change. Not at all. It's just a matter of how are we going to face these problems? And I think usually the most skillful way is to have a lot of strength and courage within inside and ability to work with our own emotional reactions in a very healthy way. And then that will create less burnout, less overwhelm, I think, as we're, trying to make a better world for all of us that we live in together.
Let me see if I can phrase this properly. Is everything has a purpose, right? According to Buddhism, am I right? And everything happens because of a higher purpose?
They would say everything happens because of karma. So it's not necessarily a higher purpose. It's like a cause and effect. So if we put something out into the universe, that will come back to us, essentially, But while it's being put out into the universe, it's kind of connecting into and meeting lots of other causes. So it can change, right? So karma is not something fixed. It's something that goes out, but then of course it meets with lots of other things. So of course, in one way, the more goodness we put into the world, the more wholesomeness and virtue, that's what we'll get back. That's what will also be out in the world. So I think we would say that's kind of that's what eventually hits purpose. But purpose itself, I would say in Buddhism, is to understand how that karma limits us, and then we want to transcend that for the benefit of others. So the purpose becomes, how skilled can I get? So we were talking a few minutes ago. How skilled at understanding my mind and emotions can I get to a point where I can even transcend duality? And then once that is accomplished, someone is free. And then, but not free in the sense like I'm cool, see you later. Again, free in the sense like how then we open our heart and compassion to others. But then we have the skill to actually really deal with it. So I think that's where purpose, goes into the more spiritual aspects. Yeah.
Do you see karma as a punishment or as a loving correction?
No, I see it as just a simple principle. Just like when you throw a rock into a pond, and then like the concentric circles kind of come out like that. Same thing. So it's just habit and cause and effect on the level of mind. So it's actually, in that way, I wouldn't call it scientific, but I would say it's a bit more of a phenomena than kind of anything else. So it's just like what we do matters. And so then, just like when I say something that's helpful to someone, or with compassion and with kind, soft words, it's more likely that that's going to affect them in a beneficial way, as opposed to me saying something in a negative way. And karma is the same. What we put out, it goes out there, right? So I think it's more just a principle. Yeah.
And Buddhism believes in reincarnation?
Yeah. And that's that process of rebirth that I was telling you about. And then, like I said, about reincarnation is not looked as like a favorable thing in Buddhism. It's sort of like being bound to that. And so then the path of practice is to unbind oneself, where we're not forced to do that. Because from a Buddhist perspective, the karma, once that goes into action, that also affects how we take rebirth and what kind of rebirth we take, right? So this is just kind of the basic principles of Buddhism for then we develop a mindset. Okay, I want to change that then, right? So actually a lot of times people think Buddhism is focusing on negative things, but it's just kind of giving a principle to then understand how we get out of the suffering, right? How do we find and come back to our own true nature, which we usually call Buddha nature? How do we let that seed ripen?
And what matters about that thing that you put out is the intention that you're doing it or the repercussion that it has in whomever you're putting it?
Definitely intention. Yeah, and that's a really good distinction, because often what could look like, let me give you an example. What could look like something harmful can be quite helpful, like a mother with her child, and the child is about to run in the street, and the mother yells, "Stop, stop," and the child freaks out, but it saved the child's life, right? So we would call that compassion. Similar, like this is maybe a little bit sorry if it's a rough example, but like a surgeon with a sharp knife, right? So if somebody didn't know it was a surgeon and they would just walk in the room, they might, why are you cutting open that person? You know, they're going to freak out. But the surgeon's cutting out maybe a tumor and saving the life. So definitely, yeah, intention is really key here, because intention is then our conscious motivation of why we're engaging in something, right? And so in Buddhism, we would say actually the action is quite important, but the intention is more important.
Okay, understand. And let me find out something. I want to know about the no mud, no lotus.
No,
Can you tell me a little bit about it?
yeah. So basically, I like this metaphor. So it's just a really popular metaphor in Buddhism. For in Asia, in India, a lotus typically grows out of a muddy pond. Yeah, and so this, what you see is this beautiful, bright, kind of awe-inspiring flower. Excuse me, came out of something so funky and smelly and dirty. And so we use that as a metaphor in Buddhism to represent how we face and work with the challenges of our own life, how we face and work with what's coming up for us. So rather than viewing the challenges around us, rather than viewing what we go through in daily life as we age throughout our life, rather than viewing it as something that's an obstacle or something that's happening to us and what's the word? Somehow oppressing us, we can use that in the path. We can use that to wake up. So essentially, without that mud, the lotus couldn't grow. So we also see it as an interdependent relationship, where in order for that lotus to grow, meaning the lotus representing our own enlightened mind, our own awakened heart, we need the mud. And so we it's not like then we have to necessarily like the mud, but we understand that without that mud, we can't have the lotus. We can't grow our enlightened, awakened heart and mind, right? So that's kind of the basic principle behind it.
Okay, so the mud, it's basically needed for us to flourish into a lotus. Can we say then that people that are like putting out bad karma are actually working in our favor in a way?
Could you keep going? Tell me more.
It's just, we need the mud in order to flourish, right? So the mud is something that it's actually useful. Let's say it's good soil for us.
Yeah.
But the mud, it's probably the circumstances, the context, the rough moments that we go through.
Yeah. Exactly.
And we owe that to people probably doing negative things, right? Which in a way they are putting, they're making for themselves bad karma, right? Because they're not doing right. So do we, in a way, should thank them? Like, is that actually in our favor? Something good that they're doing, probably without even noticing. They are helping us grow by putting that in our context.
Sure. Yeah, I think generally we could look at it that way, in the sense that when someone's coming at us with a lot of negativity and hatred, it's our chance to take the higher road and to grow our patience, to grow our loving kindness and compassion towards them, and also wishing them freedom from that, that they don't have to experience that state of mind. Because really, if we look at the state of mind of when we're angry or agitated, it's awful. We don't feel good, So we start to see, wow, I don't want them to experience that either, And so, yeah, definitely that's where we can use that, and it's also, and the mud here also refers to kind of our own experience, because in a way it's like our appearance of our reality is coming from our mind. If we really check, it's coming from our mind, Of course, there is, a table in front of me and all this kind of stuff, but also my interpretation and habits and conditioning of what this is in relationship. So we're always in relationship and in what we call in Buddhism, independence to things. And so that mud is kind of our current perspective. It's not permanent. It's changing all the time, right? So then how we react to that mud depends on which way we grow, up or down, or sideways, right?
Preferably up or down. No, up.
Yeah, really up, yeah.
Do you think that probably what we call reality is that a projection, and is that like a individual projection, or is it like a collective projection?
Yeah, so Buddhism, we would say both. So we have the collective projection of what we share as human beings and what we're all sharing now with our own projections coming from our habits and conditions. Now, another way to talk about karma is just habits and conditions, right? And so, like you and I are going to have similar human perceptions of something. Then we each have our own individual projections according to our own habits and conditions, right? How we grew up, all that kind of thing. And then, of course, from a Buddhist perspective, coming from the past as well, not just this life. That's where karma comes into play. And karma really just means like it's the action, actually. It's the kind of action itself that puts into motion all kinds of different possibilities for effects. So yeah, we would say that it's both collective and individual projections.
Okay.
And so the key is in Buddhism, we want to wake up from that projection. So we would say whether we're having a good dream or a bad dream, you're still having a dream. And so the goal is to really wake up. And when we wake up out of the dream, that's what we call enlightenment, essentially.
And do you think that, or not you, but the doctrine itself, when we wake up, what happens? Where do we go? Are we just one with the light, or tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, that's what I was saying earlier. I don't know. I'm not enlightened, so I can't say for sure. But from my teachers, like in studying and hearing different theories and texts on this, I don't think we go, we go wherever sentient beings need help. That's where enlightened beings go. They can take whatever form or shape or body in order to help others. But they don't go away to heaven or like, a paradise or something. It's not like that so much. It's like their mind becomes kind of interconnected with all of existence, and they're able to perceive that. And then they're able to, enlightened beings are able to then send out lots of forms in order to benefit others. That would be the perspective. But yeah, it's not like you then, go off somewhere, I think, But yeah, then they're definitely not forced to take a body anymore, I think.
Okay.
Like by karma, they'll take it on their own volition in order to benefit others.
That's actually beautiful. And it takes several lives for someone to accomplish that state, right?
Well, it took the historical Buddha, the Shakyamuni Buddha, 2,600 years ago, what they call three countless great eons. I think each one is a zillion years or something like that, or trillion years.
Only.
Oh, so only 3 trillion years. But no, I'm joking. There's no set number. It's like it depends on the person. But I think what we do as a Buddhist is we put into motion our practice, and we just show up, and put our effort every day, trying to grow this trying to see where and see through our projections, trying to grow our compassionate heart. And then we kind of take a long view that, I'm in this in order, not just for myself, but also to benefit others. So as long as that takes, it doesn't matter. It's fine. But then we also have kind of a great compassion that we train in that, but I also need to attain it now because look how much suffering is around. I need to help. And I need to have the most skill in order to help. So there's kind of a double paradox or a double wish there. But either way, yeah, there's no set number of how long it takes, because I don't know, for you, maybe to take
5 minutes.
Yeah, maybe 5 years or something. Me, I think I have to wait another few eons.
Okay. Earlier you were talking about duality.
Yeah.
And conquering the dual mind that we have. Can you talk a little bit more about it, please?
So here the duality is that from a Buddhist perspective, what we're habituated to is separating what appears and then its nature of how it appears, right? So here we would say that the nature of things is that they're interdependent. They're not singular. Like when I talk about the table my computer is sitting on, like just using that as an example, there is something here that can be used as a table, and I'm using it as that, but it's also in connection with my projection, and it doesn't ultimately exist as a table because it's made of many parts. And if I take away a few legs or change the paint or do something to it, it may change from being a table to a door or something else. And for an ant, it's definitely not a table. It's like a huge mountain. So they don't use it to eat, I think. Well, maybe they eat my food, but that's different. so what's my point? So that's kind of the nature of how things are, is they're not fixed or rigid or solid. They're interdependent. And yet we have the issue that we have the appearance that they're solid. When I look at this table, it feels very real to me. I don't see it as made of parts. I see it as a table. And then I have an opinion about it, and then I get emotional about it. I'm exaggerating, but
because you're filtering according to what your knowledge is, what your
the
mind.
appearance is. Yeah, exactly. What the conditioning, and we would say that's where the karma is. The karma and how we're grasping to something, and also our emotional reactions to it. And so the idea is, when something is non-dual, that the nature of something and its appearance are not separate anymore, right? So yeah, and that's when we start to find more freedom, because that's when our clinging ends, and then it's like we can dance more,
And the table.
The table can be a table, the table continues to be. That's the thing. There's no problem. It's a table, yet we also know it's not a table.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And allow me to get a little bit more private.
Sure.
You've been a Buddhist for a while, right?
Yeah.
Are you still my question always towards everyone is, do you think your mind is completely Buddhist? Like, do you think like a Buddhist, or do you see similarities in other tendencies, in other doctrines or schools or religions? Do you think that there's a way that can be unified? Like, where do you see that we meet different doctrines?
Yeah. I mean, I think at the essence of all religions, and especially the kind of contemplative inner parts of them, what I call the wisdom traditions within each religion, you see so much crossover, right? And I look at this very much like kind of like different paths going up a mountain, right? And so it might be a very different way of getting there, but they all kind of go up a mountain in a certain way. And so what I'm a fan of is preserving kind of wisdom traditions, meaning like, I don't personally want to blend Buddhism with contemplative Christianity. No, I don't think it's a problem if an individual does that. That's not really an issue. But when we blend the wisdom traditions, we lose kind of their essence a little bit. I think in America we have this idea, North America, the United States, this idea that like, I grew up with this principle that, if we just take all the good things and put them together, we'll make the best thing. I don't think that's always the case, So again, this is up for debate and up for kind of like maybe a deeper dialogue. But I do think that each tradition in its own is important and has value, and definitely adds to the happiness and well-being of people, because not everybody's going to connect with Buddhism. So why not connect then with the beautiful kind of open-hearted loving kindness of Jesus or Mother Mary or whatever, right? And so I think that's extremely skillful. And then of course, we have a lot of sometimes bad apples in religions, and that's not the religion. That's a person
Humanity.
Humanity, a person who's confused, doing all sorts of stuff with it. But before I got into Buddhism, I was really interested in the Gnostic Gospels of Jesus.
The Dead Sea.
Yeah, and the early Christians, and that was like, some of that is really like, you could see very like similar to Buddhism. And so, and same if you study like what do you call it, esoteric Sufism or Kabbalah, and so everybody's trying to look into the nature of like, why, how do we be happy, right? I
I would
think
say it's just knowledge before being institutionalized by people saying you have to go through me in order to get through there. Well, it's
exactly,
the
yeah.
raw thing.
And that happens everywhere. That happens in Buddhism too.
Yeah,
And it's
it's
just a
normal.
matter,
It's our
yeah.
nature, right?
But then we can still, but that there's an essence there
The
that we can
essence.
connect with. That's the important thing. And when a tradition loses that, that's when it's very sad, I feel, if it loses that, right? But I
It,
think so far we haven't lost it. There's always people, whether they're above ground or underground, practicing the essence of these things. You know, the real beauty where we're trying to bring out this heart of compassion and loving kindness, but in a completely non-referential way, you know, not conditioned, beyond conditioning.
how do you really? How to me it's like very very confusing. How do you really practice compassion and love towards others without selfishness when you know that by practicing compassion you are benefiting yourself? Make sense? I don't know
Yeah.
if I'm explaining. Like it's not detached from you. Like practicing compassion towards other, you know that it's gonna come back to you, so it's not entirely selfish, right? In a way.
You mean selfless?
Or
Yeah,
selfless, yes.
yeah. I don't know. I don't think it matters because it's sort of like we already established that we're interconnected. So like how I treat you also affects me, you know? And so I think there's just no way around it. And I don't think it has to be selfish. I think the Dalai Lama often calls it wise selfishness, you know?
Okay.
Like if you want to be smart and be selfish, you should generate compassion for others.
Okay.
And so I don't think there's a huge issue, but I will say we will say in Buddhism, as a practitioner develops that more and more, the self they stop becoming so interested in themselves. It just naturally starts to loosen. So I don't think it's an issue eventually because it naturally starts to open. But I think it's a good starting place for some of us because some of us are like, well, what's in it for me, you know? And then we could
Yeah.
say, this is what's in it for you. And then they can start to practice. And then eventually they don't care about, you know, there's not so much issue of like, am I getting something out of this, right?
If we reverse engineer that, can we say that taking care of ourselves and growing, enlightening ourselves is also a way of benefiting the environment and others?
Exactly. Definitely. Yeah. That is the starting place. I think we have to hold the right balance here of like, am I using my spiritual practice to become more self absorbed? Or am I using it to become as skillful as possible in order to benefit others and in order to bring more beauty and love and care and compassion into the world? So definitely, I think there's no choice because I think, like I said, if we just kind of if I stay with my kind of pitiful view of myself, let's say if I had that, my pitiful kind of idea, poor me, and then I go, my help is going to be really small, you know, because it's coming from this viewpoint that there's this poverty mentality I'm holding about myself. So how could I hold anyone else in a beautiful view? It's very difficult, right? So sometimes transforming that view of ourselves, then we're able to see others as beautiful beings. I know, sometimes when I on my good days, which are rare, uh, I look, uh, I look at another being and I see real beauty. And I notice if I look back towards myself, I'm reflecting the same thing towards myself. And on the days when I'm just like, I wish I didn't, don't want to do what I have to do, or I'm just not feeling very good in myself. It's much easier to, ignore others and not see them in their beauty. I mean, not their outer beauty, their own inner beauty of just their human qualities and what we call in Buddhism their Buddha nature. I ran into a very beautiful quote the other day of that when a Buddha or an enlightened being looks at a human being or a sentient being,
Mhm.
they don't see like an ordinary messed up person. They see it. They see their Buddha nature. They see their basic goodness underneath. And so I thought, wow, I want to see people like that. It's so beautiful, no?
It's it's pretty much the same principle as the namaste, like the light in me sees the
Hmm.
light in you, right?
Well, yeah, it all comes from same cultural background, right? It's
Okay.
India.
Okay. Then, as we reach the end of our talk together. We're
Yeah.
gonna go to the questions, okay?
Sure.
But before starting with the questions, we want to remind our audience that if you want to help Mindalia TV and other people to reach the content that we share in our channel, there's a couple of simple things you can do just by liking this video, leaving us a positive comment down below, or subscribing to our channel. In that way, we can reach more people around the globe that are going to be, you know, taking advantage and being able to see the content that we share in our channel. Also, we have the active chat on the side of your screen. So if you have questions, please just follow the format, the word question in caps, then the place where you're seeing us from, and the actual question that you have, and Scott will kindly answer. We're going to start with the questions now, Scott.
Sure.
Leave your camera on. I'm going to be just reading here for you, okay?
Sure.
Let's see. What is your personal insight about attachments and ego?
Oh. um, I think attachment is a tricky word because some attachments are positive, like a mother and child, like that kind of attachment and the bonding we have with our parents. Here in Buddhism, we would use it's usually the word shampa, which means of kind of hooking, like where you get hooked into something and you cling, right? So I could say the question one more time. I got.
Yeah. Probably guess when we say attachment, it can be like kind of lost in translation, right? Because it's not the
Yeah.
same. The question is your personal insights about attachments and ego.
Yeah, I mean, basically, this more negative type of attachment or unconstructive one, where we get hooked to something, I see it as the fundamental kind of basis for pretty much all of the suffering I go through. Because the moment I get hooked into something, I'm locked into my projection. You know, I'm locked into perceiving whatever that situation is as only that, and then I'm fixed there, right?
Like
So
driving with the handbrake, right?
exactly. So attachments like being on like a fly paper where it's sticky and you're just there. It makes it very difficult to get off, right? And so ego here would be the identity we form around that, you know, the identity we form around that situation, which is by the formation of that identity, then the attachment happens, right? So by the idea of like, I'm Buddhist teacher or whatever, and you know, somebody challenges me or something, and then I say, and if I get stuck in that identity, and then I have attachment for my own view and aversion for someone else's view, then I'm stuck, right? And it leads only to pain. That's all it leads to. So my view is we should work to uproot them, but it's tricky in the sense that we just say, well, I'm going to be unattached. That doesn't really work so well, you know. It's just a concept. We
You
have
can
to
even be attached to the fact of being unattached.
exactly, and that's I know a lot of people like that.
We're all struggling with things like that.
Yeah.
Let's see. Which Buddha's teaching do you believe to be the most relevant for a society like ours?
Mm, wow. There's so many. I mean, I would say this teaching on the mud and the lotus, understanding more and more that we can't buy our way out of we can't buy our way to happiness. We can't condition our way into happiness. Happiness has to come from the inside. It has to be something we nurture by taking that manure of life, that mud of life, and letting it really form us and grow us, and not just grow us in the way of like where we become a strong person. That's important, but also where we investigate. Oh, okay, how is it? Where, again, going back to that previous question, where am I getting stuck? Where am I getting stuck to that fly paper? How can I sort of see the situation differently or work with the situation to find some freedom within it, right? And so I think that's where meditation comes in. So I think for a lot of people, just the simple meditation in the one of sutra on the basically called the Satipatthana Sutra, where sutra on the mindfulness of body, breath, all of that. We we work with watching the experience. We develop an awareness to watch the mind, watch the body, watch the breath, watch the experience. And slowly, slowly, the mind can settle. The mind of attachment, the mind of aversion starts to settle, and we start to see through. Just like if we put a glass of muddy water down, all of the mud eventually starts to settle to the bottom. So I think that's a really good starting place. And all of us need that so much because we're just really overwhelmed and things are so speedy, and there's just so much going on. We have to keep track of 5 social media accounts at once, raise a family, work 60 hours a week, and still it's hard to pay bills for a lot of people. So I think finding a little space in the mind, little calmness, can really help in the beginning to develop then really working with where we get stuck, right?
Thank you.
Yeah.
How do you suggest to take ourselves less seriously?
That's a good question.
Yeah, it says, I find that very hard personally when it comes to personal relationships.
Yeah. I don't know. I use laughter a lot of the time.
Sense of humor?
Yeah, a sense of humor. A little bit. It relates to everything I'm saying, right? So it's not an easy thing sometimes because we have to also understand where we get stuck, and where we're kind of going too much into our cocoon, and then we have to challenge that in the sense of like, oh, okay, how is this really? And sometimes that means not challenging with the mind, but actually going into the body, feeling what that experience is, not rejecting it, being willing to be with that, being willing to open to a new perspective on that.
Because we're even scared of fear, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Of being,
So I think a lot of seriousness comes out of this solidification of our experience, where we see it like as the only one true reality, as opposed to, we can start to see, oh no, there's many ways to look at this, right? And as soon as we start to do that, well, not rejecting the feeling, we'll still, not bypassing the emotion we have to go through, then I think we start to take things a little less personal, a little less seriously. But I don't know. I also use laughter, like in the sense, like sometimes I just do ridiculous things, and then I laugh at it. But I don't always feel like I can laugh at it. So
that's a great therapy. In my opinion, is great.
Yeah.
Let me see what we have here. What made you come back to the US after so long?
Well, I was living in the US, maybe as a monk is what they mean, right?
Correct.
Yeah. So I only studied in Nepal so I was a monk 9 years, but I was mostly in retreat here in California and Colorado. And then I went to Nepal to study during those years, like a little bit.
Okay.
But I can answer what made me kind of come back to non-monastic life.
Mm-hmm.
I think just normal things like wanting intimate relationships again, like, romantic relationships, a partner. And some, just for me personally, it became a little bit socially isolating because I wasn't living in a monastery. I was mostly in retreat alone. And then a lot of my monastic friends were in different areas, and so I wouldn't be able to see them very often. And so I was just living a life very different than a lot of society. And I think I just wanted to kind of have a little bit more connection with the world in a direct way again. And yeah, relationship. I think when it comes down to it, that's probably the hardest part of being a monk, is you're not engaging in intimate relationships, or I should say intimate romantic relationships. And yeah, it can become tough after a while. So I think for me, there's part of that. And I also wanted to branch out as a teacher and more be able to approach people from what they're going through in their life. And as a monk, you're going through kind of different things. It's not always the same.
Can you talk to us a little bit about the silent retreats? How long were you like that?
Yeah, so I did a combined about 4 years of silent retreat. Not all at one time, but I did a lot of like 4-month silent retreats. And, they were silent because there was nobody else there. So I was just alone, meaning there's a caretaker who brought food and other people on retreat, but I wouldn't see them usually. And so I don't know. They were really powerful, very challenging too, because it's not like you're just there doing whatever you want. I had a practice I'm working with about 8 hours a day, and then in between studying, and then maybe I take a walk, and of course cooking my own food and stuff like that. So I call it kind of psychic surgery, like like not psychic like being psychic, but like working with the mind and surgery on the mind. And some days I thought I was going to freak out, and some days were amazing. Like wow, you could take your practice so deep when you close your mouth and stop engaging with so much outer stimuli. Really, we go into a lot of deep places, and so sometimes that's why more challenging psychological things can come out because there's room for them to come out. We're no longer numbing them, or we're no longer too busy to notice. So yeah, it was an incredible time. I think I feel so fortunate to have been able to do all that, because I was really able to dive into some practices that were more theoretical for me, and they became much more experiential over the time in retreat.
You think we can actually quiet the mind at a certain point? Is it harder to quiet the mouth than the mind?
Yeah, no, definitely we can quiet the mind. There's no question. And then I think at a certain point, that's kind of in the beginning, focusing on quieting the mind as a preliminary. Then after a while, it doesn't matter so much because the mind just does what it does, and you don't have to grasp at it. But of course, it's kind of like because of that, the mind will quiet down too. So yeah, I think it's definitely doable. It's just like anything else. The more effort we put into it, show up every day, and we try and we put our energy into it, the more strength we grow. So it's very similar to practicing a musical instrument or training the body at something. But here we're training the mind. And so, if we just will ourselves to quiet the mind, that doesn't necessarily work out. We have to get used to a meditation, get used to a framework and a sort of practice or a theory, and then things can start to shift. And anybody can do it. I don't think it's just a matter of time and effort. Yeah.
That's amazing. Let me see what we have here. What? No, we said this one already. What practical tools do you use to handle negative emotions when they rise within you?
Yeah, this is a good one. For me personally, I work with a practice, and in my one-to-one work with people, I work a lot with this particular practice where I'm using more of a somatic technique. So emotions have kind of often a few components to them, but they can have a component that's in the thinking mind where we're ruminating on something that happened, that triggered the emotion, or the emotion is triggering something else. And what I tend to do is drop that into the body and feel the more sensory part of, or the more feeling aspect of the emotion in the body. And for me, when I'm feeling that, I don't do anything with it. I just try to leave it alone, let it be, and become aware. And then open up some space and allowance for that. Because so much of the time when a negative emotion comes, we want to get rid of it, or we just completely get overtaken by it. So one of my biggest practices is the one I teach a lot is on how to open up a space where we don't have to suppress the experience, we don't have to avoid it, but we also don't have to be overtaken by it. So that's kind of the main practice I work with emotions.
That must be really hard.
It's really challenging in the beginning, and then you get kind of used to it over time, and you start to develop a new way and a new relationship to emotions. I think one way to frame meditation is all of it is just creating new relationships with things. We have a habit of how we work with something, and in meditation, we're training and developing new kinds of habits of how we relate to the mind and emotions.
Are we in a way threat of detaching too much from people or from situations? Like,
can you say that again?
are we threat in a way of being too detached? Like, how do we, if we keep evolving spiritually, are we like exposed in a way, or is there a threat that we detach too much until we come to the point that things don't really matter anymore, like corporeal things, or that's
So
not
that's the kind of that can happen. That's the kind of wrong way I was saying earlier, We're not aiming for that so much with detachment. It depends, because some of Buddhist path is you're kind of deciding no, and then you're getting away from it because it triggers too much for you, right? But in generally in the Mahayana Buddhism, which is where we're more integrating into understanding that our own path is connected to others, and we want to really see the relief of not only our own suffering but the suffering of others. And that becomes one of our primary motivation. So there, it runs less of a risk of this kind of detachment going this way, because then the whole process is, how do I get free from my own clinging so that I can become a more skillful helper and servant
That
towards
makes
others?
it even harder,
Yeah,
right?
of course. Well,
Yes.
yeah. But I was going to say, it's not that you become detached and then there's nothing and then you're kind of empty robot kind of person. It's just that you have more freedom, because we start to see where we're bound, where we're hooked, or where we're kind of sticky on that fly paper. And when we're
I like that
free,
analogy.
yeah, then there's more room for the compassionate heart to grow. So we could see that what's obstructing compassion the most, it's actually attachment, if you really check in your mind. What obstructs us from enacting compassion towards ourselves and others? It's attachment. So when the attachment reduces, the compassion can grow. So I see it as not necessarily a dry thing that we can come into, though that can happen to people. But really what we're aiming for is the attachment to reduce, and then our motivation, our intention for engaging with the world shifts, right? Where it's no longer all about me. It becomes about us more and more and more.
What is the approach on health from the Buddhism perspective?
Well, I mean, Buddhist medicine. There's a whole areas of Buddhist medicine and with Tibetan medicine that come out of Ayurvedic medicine. So the approach is that, in general, that body and mind are connected, and that one affects the other. You cannot separate out emotions and mind from physical illness, and vice versa. Also, there's also what they call an energy body that's kind of interfacing between the physical body and the mind. And so they treat also the energy body in Buddhist medicine. And so, yeah, so I think,
You think that like diseases or the things that are affecting our physical body have a root on our spiritual body or our energetic
definitely,
body? Yes.
definitely, yeah. Yeah. So they would say, they start in, everything starts in the mind, in the sense of like action starts in the mind, where first we have to have some kind of something click, some reason to do something, and then we act with our speech or body, right? So in that way, disease can also come from it.
Okay. And what is the approach uh, towards women? Towards women, are we different? Are we the same? Where lies the difference between men and women? And can we both go to the same spiritual path, or is it something that has to be done separately?
No, yeah, there's no difference. Yeah, meaning no difference in the qualities that it takes to achieve awakening or enlightenment. That's all the same. Yeah.
Why do you think that the world, or at least the modern world, has so many male representatives from all the different faiths, and
Yeah.
we don't really see women as a priestess in this era, at least?
Yeah. I mean, older than uh, racism is patriarchy, right? So patriarchy, and patriarchy is just, it's very old, and it's going to take a while to shift things, but I think we're working on it, and I think there's a lot of amazing women Buddhist teachers who are starting to be strong voices in Buddhism. There always have been women Buddhist teachers. They just haven't gotten the attention that the men have. But often I find some of the most beautiful teachings coming from those women Buddhist teachers. A different approach, or um, again, like a different life experience that they bring to their teaching and their understanding of Buddhism. So yeah, I think it's just a matter of time, and we're in a moment now where we can start to shift that and create more equity. Not for the sense that equity in itself, but um, it's like we need more diversity there. We need more voices and a more range of it. And I think it's so wonderful that a young, if like a young woman is interested in Buddhism, she should see someone who looks like her as an example of that, of what she can achieve. You know?
A role model.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's go with the next one. What do you personally believe happens after awakening? Oh, I think we talked about it already, right? We stop reincarnating, and then what? I think we covered that,
Yeah, we
right?
covered it. Yeah.
Okay.
You're free. You're free
I
to
can,
do a dance party. I call it. No, I'm just kidding.
exactly.
But a dance party.
Well, it will be interesting. I would love to peek and see what they're doing, right? And I think it's a very romantic and very beautiful idea to think that let's say we, because at a certain point we're all gonna get there, right?
Yes, that's
That
that.
we
Definitely.
just go working for others and become part of the system. How about
Yeah.
animals? What is the how do Buddhism see animals?
Basically, animals. So every being that's sentient, that
Mhm.
has awareness, has Buddha nature. So in that sense, there's no difference, because that seed, that latent seed, is the potential for awakening, and that's within every single being, no matter if they're an animal, man, woman, anyone. And so, yeah, that's generally how we see animals. And then, but also karmically, the rebirth isn't the best for practicing meditation, obviously, because I haven't seen a super meditating dog yet, though people will put their dogs in the meditation posture, but I haven't seen a dog attain enlightenment.
Probably they're always
But
meditating,
no
and we
offense
just don't know.
no offense to any dogs out there. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, and yeah, of course we don't know exactly, but you can kind of see sometimes by the actions of something. So that's the Buddhist belief that animals are beings, and they should be treated with respect and nonviolence. I mean, that's just obvious. Why? Because they don't want violence. You know, they don't want to be killed. They don't want to be food either. You know,
I don't want
so
to
they
be
should
food.
be treated with respect.
Do
And
you
then
practice veganism or vegetarian?
I've been vegetarian on and off. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, for my life. That's
Yeah,
But I
it's
think
rough.
vegetarian is the way to go if you can do it, and you have the discipline. Definitely the way to go.
Yeah, but we're still humans, right? I think that while we're still here, we get to break the rules every once in a while, right?
Sure.
Scott, we have completed our time. I want
Okay.
to thank you on behalf of Mindalia TV. I want to, thank you for being with us. It's been great time. Thank you for sharing so much knowledge with the people that sees us. Before leaving, we just want to remind you that if you want to help other people like you to get the contact that we share in our channel, there's a couple of things you can do. Just click like our videos, share this with other people that you think that can benefit from it. You can leave us a positive comment down below, and subscribe to our channel as well. Mindalia TV is a non-profit organization. Our mission is to share knowledge around the globe and help people raise their level of consciousness. You are welcome to join us every weekday at 9 US Eastern Standard Time. And before leaving, we want to ask Scott to say bye to our audience.
Bye. And thank you. I really enjoyed chatting with you and connecting with everyone. If people want to connect with me too, they can go to my website. It's just my name, Scott Tusa, TUSA.com. And got podcasts and blogs and fun stuff there if you want to check it out.
Scott2USA.com.
Yeah, so SCOTTTUSA.com.
Sounds awesome. Thank you, Scott.
Thank you. I
Bye,
enjoyed so much.
Mindalia.